What the heck? Lin Yi's eyes narrowed as he focused on the ground. A faint, silk-like thread sprouted from the dirt, snaking upward until it tethered itself to Chu Kai's ankle. The sight sent a chill down his spine.
You can see those threads again?
Chu Kai's body wavered, caught in an awkward, frozen stride. He held his foot suspended in the air, paralyzed by the uncertainty of Lin Yi's warning. Lin Yi gave a silent nod. He dropped to a crouch, his fingers closing around the ethereal filament. He gave it a sharp, decisive yank. Just as he had done with Uncle Anne, the glowing thread snapped under the pressure. A blinding jolt of agony flared in Lin Yi's own ankle. It felt as if a jagged blade had just bitten into his flesh. Hiss! He clamped his jaw shut, forcing the scream back down his throat. The pain was white-hot and absolute. Chu Kai watched in alarm as Lin Yi's face contorted, his features twisting into a mask of pure suffering.
What's wrong? What happened?
Chu Kai pulled his foot back and knelt beside his friend, his voice thick with concern. I broke the thread. Lin Yi waited for the throbbing in his ankle to dull to a manageable ache before he could find the words to speak.
Something's not right.
Lin Yi paused, his mind racing through the possibilities. He scanned the surrounding area, his eyes searching for anything else that felt out of place. He reached out and snatched a sturdy branch from a nearby bush. With cautious precision, he poked it into the exact spot where the glowing thread had emerged. In an instant, a set of rusted metal jaws erupted from the dirt, biting down on the branch with lethal force.
A bear trap?
Chu Kai's eyes widened, his face turning a shade paler. He looked at the mangled branch, realizing just how close he had come to a horrific injury. If Lin Yi hadn't intervened, those serrated teeth would have been sunk deep into his own ankle, crushing bone and tearing flesh. The trap's jaws were a mess of ancient rust and dark, crusted stains, the unmistakable residue of old blood, now caked with grime. The phantom pain in Lin Yi's ankle finally vanished. He straightened his back, lifting the branch with the heavy trap still dangling from its end. He took a few more steps forward, testing the ground ahead with the weighted branch. Barely 4 steps later, another trap sprang to life. It clamped onto the wood right next to the first one, the 2 metal weights pulling the branch toward the earth.
There's more. You mean this entire path is a minefield of these things?
Chu Kai's brow furrowed in confusion as he surveyed the trail.
Why would they do this? Why put traps here of all places? Is it to keep the ground rats out? To stop them from swarming the village?
We haven't seen a single trap until we reach this specific stretch. If it were for the rats, they'd be everywhere, not just here.
Lin Yi looked up, his gaze fixing on the skeletal silhouette of the roofless house in the distance.
Look where this road leads. It goes straight to that building.
So, these traps are meant to keep people out of that house?
Maybe. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's to keep the people inside that house from ever coming back to the village.
The calculation was simple and cruel. To return to the safety of the village from that roofless shell of a house, an escapee had only 2 paths. This road, seeded with hidden steel teeth, or the dark, suffocating embrace of the forest. For the wounded, the forest was a death trap. The metallic tang of blood from their open wounds would act like a dinner bell for the ground rats and the monstrous birds circling above. Even if they could mask the scent, their broken bodies would never survive the terrain. Every step through the dense, thorny underbrush would be an agonizing struggle they were destined to lose. No matter which way they turned, the result was the same: a slow, lonely death. And even if they possessed the impossible strength to limp down this trail, the bear traps lay in wait, ready to finish what the monsters had started.
I get the isolation part. keeping the injured away so they don't bring the rats and those things into the village. That makes sense.
Chu Kai stared down at the rusted iron at his feet, his voice dropping to a hollow whisper.
But these traps, why go this far? Why make it impossible for them to ever come back? This isn't about quarantine. This isn't about care. It feels more like...
It's an execution ground, a way to slaughter anyone desperate enough to try and run.
Lin Yi finished the thought for him, his voice as cold as the steel in the ground. The reality of the village was curdling before their eyes, a stark, bloody contrast to the sanitized story Dean Van Looy had fed them.
I should have seen the patterns earlier. This place isn't like the city. Resources are non-existent here. In a place like this, recovery isn't an option. If you're seriously hurt, you're a liability the village can't afford to heal. Without medicine, without proper care, a simple infection becomes a death sentence. And in this environment, wounds don't just heal on their own. They fester, they rot.
Lin Yi let the sentence hang in the air, the unspoken conclusion heavy between them. That building wasn't a clinic or a shelter. It was a disposal site. A place where the broken were left to rot, trapped between the predators in the woods and the traps on the path. They were prisoners of their own survival, marked for death the moment their usefulness to the village ended.
Hold on a second.
Chu Kai's gaze locked onto Lin Yi, his mind connecting the dots.
That thread. You're sure it was coming from exactly where the trap was buried? And you said it was tied to my ankle? If you hadn't seen it, if I just kept walking, that thing would have taken my leg off, wouldn't it?
Lin Yi thought back to the sound of the metal snap and the phantom agony that had flared in his own leg. It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was right there in the dirt. He had felt the impact and heard the mechanism trigger before he ever touched the branch. It was a sensory echo of an event that hadn't happened yet.
What if the threads aren't about who's a freak and who isn't? What if it's something else entirely? Something about me?
Wait, I thought your power was about time. You know, loops and stopping the clock. How does that turn into glowing strings in the dirt?
The future.
Lin Yi's voice crackled with a sudden electric excitement.
When I snapped that thread, I think I felt a future that was about to happen. These aren't just strings. They're threads of time. They're paths leading toward what's coming next.
It's a theory.
Chu Kai admitted, his expression skeptical.
But I've got to tell you, your powers are getting stranger by the minute.
Actually, I think it's a breakthrough.
A rare, genuine smile tugged at the corners of Lin Yi's mouth.
Dying to reset or stopping time in a panic, those are reactive. Unpredictable. I can't rely on them. But these threads, they give me a choice. They let me see the danger before it strikes.
So you can see them all the time now? Like some kind of permanent radar?
I'm not sure, but every time one of you is in trouble, they appear. They guide me. The source of the threat is at one end, and the target is at the other. It's a map of impending disaster.
As he spoke the words, the color drained from Lin Yi's face. His blood seemed to turn to ice in his veins.
God, Uncle Anne.
The memory hit him like a physical blow. He saw it again, vivid and terrifying, the moment before Chengdao disappeared into the tree line. A glowing white thread, snaking out from the barrel of Brother Lei's shotgun, reaching through the air until it tethered itself directly over Uncle Anne's heart. Lin Yi stood frozen, his eyes narrowed as if trying to pierce through the fabric of reality itself. His pulse thrummed in his ears, a frantic drumbeat of realization. If these glowing filaments were truly what he feared, the threads of time, then the future was no longer an invisible mystery. It was a tangled web laid bare before him. His gaze followed the shimmering cord that linked Brother Lei's shotgun to Chengdao's chest. It was a direct line of death, a promise of violence etched into the very air. The memory of the thread snapping flooded his mind, accompanied by the phantom echo of a gunshot and a phantom pain that tore through his heart. It had felt so real, so final.
Uncle Ann is in danger.
The words were a dry rasp in his throat. Every instinct screamed at him to plunge into the lightless forest to find Chengdao before that trigger was pulled. But he forced himself to still. He pulled in a long, shuddering breath, tasting the cold night air. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. It would only lead to a faster grave. Beside him, Chu Kai's breath was coming in ragged gasps. The strain of maintaining his sensory enhancement in this hostile territory was taking its toll. Blindly charging into the woods would be suicide. They would likely lose their way, alert their enemies, and perhaps even die before they ever found Uncle Ann. Lin Yi tightened his grip on his resolve. And Chengdao was a butcher. He knew how to survive. He had been warned about Brother Lei. That had to be enough for now. The future wasn't set in stone. Every choice, every warning was a ripple in the pond of time. Perhaps his warning had already shifted the path of that bullet. And if the worst came to pass, if Chengdao fell, Lin Yi knew he could always cast himself back. He could die and reset the clock and try again. He turned his eyes toward the skeletal structure looming in the distance, the house that lacked a roof, standing like a broken tooth against the sky.
Let's go. We need to see what's inside that place.
Information was the only currency that mattered. He needed to know what this village was, what its people were, and what secrets were hidden in that ruined shelter. Every scrap of data collected now would be a weapon in the next loop. They had to turn their disadvantage into an edge. With weapons held ready and their senses strained to the breaking point, they moved cautiously toward the distant, haunted structure. The narrow trail was a minefield of jagged iron and rusted teeth. Animal traps lay buried beneath the loose soil, their positions erratic and cruel. Even with their torches held high, the flickering light failed to reveal the buried danger. The jagged jaws of the traps remained perfectly concealed, waiting for a careless step. Lin Yi's eyes shimmered. From the darkness, glowing filaments of light began to rise, snaking across the dirt like spectral cobwebs. Every time he went to plant his foot, a thread would bridge the gap between the ground and his ankle, a silent warning of the trap below. They moved with agonizing slowness, following the map of light visible only to Lin Yi. It was a painstaking crawl, but one by one, they navigated the deadly path. As the ruined structure loomed larger, a new horror assaulted them. A thick, cloying stench began to waft from the house, reaching even Lin Yi's unenhanced senses. It was a smell that transcended mere filth. It was the heavy, sweet rot of decay, a physical weight in the cold air. It wasn't just the iron tang of fresh blood. It was a suffocating cocktail of biological waste and the syrupy rot of neglected gangrene.
This is no infirmary.
Lin Yi's voice was flat, his expression hardening as he looked at Chu Kai. The reality of the place was setting in, colder and more clinical than any monster they'd faced.
Supplies are rare out here. Healing would be a slow process, but this...
Chu Kai nodded slowly, his eyes wide with a growing, horrific realization.
If this is where they send the injured, then recovery is just a polite word for waiting to die.
Chu Kai's face paled. The overwhelming stench was a physical assault on his heightened senses, sending waves of nausea through his system. His stomach lurched violently. Even through the cloth he pressed against his face, the foul air felt thick enough to taste.
I'm sorry. I can't keep it up. The senses. It's too much. I have to drop the enhancement.
He let out a gasping breath as he deactivated his ability, the supernatural clarity of the world fading into a mercifully duller reality.
Let's see what we came for and get out. Being blind out here makes my skin crawl.
The house was a hollowed-out shell. As they stepped closer, they saw it had no doors to bar the way, no windows to keep out the night. It was an open wound in the earth. The structure offered no sanctuary. It was completely exposed, a standing invitation to the giant rats and the tattered pale birds that hunted the forest. A ring of torches flickered nearby, but but the gaps between them were vast. They were less of a defensive line and more of a beacon, marking the location of the feast. A low, rattling groan echoed from the shadows. Lin Yi peered inside, and the sight that met his eyes made his breath hitch in his throat. The floor was a charnel house, carpeted in bleached human bones. He could see the jagged, splintered marks where teeth had gnawed through the calcium, seeking every scrap of marrow. A slick, viscous film covered the earth, a disgusting slurry of old blood and biological waste that made every step a slippery, treacherous ordeal. Even after the horrors of the city, after the slaughterhouses and the skin wearers, this primitive cruelty struck a deeper chord of terror in Lin Yi. He remembered Chengdao's grim warning. The monsters in the city were predators. They were honest in their hunger. But these villagers, they were something else entirely. The city creatures gave their prey the mercy of a quick death. These humans left their own kind to rot in the dark, to be eaten alive by vermin and despair.
Were these villagers our own kind?
Chu Kai's voice trembled, his brow furrowed as he stared at the piles of remains. The cruelty of it was beyond his comprehension.
How can anyone be this heartless?
It explains why the population is so small.
The pieces were finally falling into place in Lin Yi's mind, a grim puzzle of survival at any cost.
Uncle Dean said they'd been bringing people back from the city for years. The village should be teeming with life, but it's not. Now I understand. To this village, people aren't neighbors. They're just consumables.
Lin Yi let out a long, heavy sigh, the weight of the discovery pressing down on his shoulders.
They dump the wounded here so their cries and the scent of their blood don't draw the monsters to the village center. They use the dying as a sacrificial shield. As long as the rats and birds are busy here, the village stays safe. This house, it's just a cafeteria for the forest predators.
Let's just go. We need to find Chu Yun and get her away from these people.
The realization that they were surrounded by monsters wearing human faces made Chu Kai's desperation reach a breaking point.
Chu Kai, look!
As they turned to leave, Lin Yi's torch caught a movement in the far corner. Someone was still alive, huddled amongst the bones. The low, animalistic groans they had heard were coming from a figure lying face down in the filth. The body was so emaciated it looked like a skeleton draped in a translucent parchment-like skin. There was almost no meat left on the bones.
What happened to their back? Why is there a hole?
Following Chu Kai's gaze, Lin Yi saw it. Between the shoulder blades, where the spine met the shoulders, there was a jagged, irregular cavity. It looked as if something large and parasitic had been violently ripped out from within the body, taking chunks of skin and muscle with it.
The villagers, they're hiding something on their backs.
He recalled the permanent, hunched posture of every person he'd seen in the village. It wasn't just age or labor, it was a physical burden. He didn't know what the parasite was, or what it did, but the sight of that empty, tattered hole told him enough. There was no humanity left in this place. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the heavy silence of the clearing, coming from just outside the torchlight.
Lin Yi, what are you two doing all the way out here?
The dark woods press in, gnarled branches reaching like skeletal hands. A sudden voice slices through the oppressive silence.
Lin Yi, you told me you were just taking a short stroll. What brought you all the way out here?
A dry rustle echoes from the depths of the forest. Something is shifting in the gloom, a spectral shape flickering between the trunks. Lin Yi spins around. Emerging from the shadows, Dean Van Looy approaches with a slow, deliberate stride. Beside him, Chu Kai remains tense. The horrifying sights they just witnessed in the shack are still fresh, and the sudden interruption caught them completely off guard.
It is dangerous to be out here, Lin Yi, especially when the sun goes down.
The flickering orange glow of a torch illuminates Dean Van Looy's face, but it brings no comfort. He wears a grin that is both wide and horribly wrong. In that single expression, Lin Yi recognizes a look he has seen too many times before. It's the raw, predatory hunger of a freak sizing up its next meal. The realization hits him with the force of a physical blow. The man standing there is not human. None of them are. Every single person in this village is a monster wearing a stolen face.
Uncle Dean, what are you doing out here?
Lin Yi forces his voice to remain steady. He has to play it cool, to feign ignorance while his heart hammers against his ribs. This is their territory. These creatures have spent years mastering this terrain. If he panics now, they're dead. He scans the perimeter, dreading the possibility that Dean Van Looy isn't the only one watching from the dark.
I was worried when you didn't come back. I decided to come looking for you.
Worried. The word feels like a sick joke. There is no worry in those eyes, only the cold calculation of a hunter.
Uncle Dean, is this the place where the village handles its dead? We were just looking for some fresh air and saw the light. We came to investigate. But this, it is terrifying.
Lin Yi steps forward, subtly positioning himself in front of Chu Kai. Behind his back, his fingers signal a silent command. Check the perimeter.
I'm glad you found us. My legs are like jelly. I was so spooked, I actually forgot which way lead back to the village. Without you, I don't think I could have found my way home.
Chu Kai remains silent, his body practically vibrating with the data flooding his mind. He has reactivated his senses, and the world is now a cacophony of horror. The stench is the first thing that hits him. A thick, cloying odor of putrefaction that feels like it's coating the inside of his lungs. It mixes with the chaotic sounds of the forest, the scrape of scales on bark, the skittering of multiple legs, the wet slap of flesh. He feels like he's drowning in a stagnant pit of methane. Every sound is magnified 100-fold, a jagged roar that threatens to shatter his mind. He gasps for air, the sensory input almost physical in its weight. It's like standing in the middle of a construction site where the noise is the only thing keeping you from falling.
Uncle Dean, I'm sorry to have made you come all this way to find us alone. I should have known better.
Chu Kai's voice is low, barely audible over his own rapid heartbeat. He's struggling to maintain his composure. As he speaks, his eyes dart around, searching for any sign of movement. He holds up a single finger where only Lin Yi can see it. 1. Lin Yi understands the code instantly. Only one signature is nearby, only Dean Van Looy. Relief flashes through him. If it's just this one freak, they have a chance. He knows what they're capable of together. But that confidence is shallow, easily broken by the cold reality of the monster before them.
Lin Yi, you gave me your word. You were supposed to stay near the village. Why did you disobey?
The tone of his voice has changed. The superficial warmth is gone, replaced by a low, vibrating growl that vibrates in the chest.
You saw what you weren't supposed to see, didn't you?
Saw what? I don't know what you mean.
Lin Yi clutches his backpack to his chest, pitching his voice high and thin. He plays the part of the terrified child perfectly.
Uncle Dean, are you talking about these bodies? It is just a misunderstanding, right?
You know the secret now. There is no going back.
Dean Van Looy tosses his torch aside. The flames hiss as they hit the damp ground, casting long, erratic shadows that dance against the trees.
Secret? What are you talking about? Uncle Dean, you're scaring me.
Lin Yi's hand is already on the zipper. He doesn't look away from the monster's eyes.
Lin Yi, back then, you weren't like this. You were such a good boy. You never tried to do things on your own.
Dean Van Looy's voice is thick with a twisted nostalgia. He steps closer, the shadows stretching and warping around him.
You could have stayed here forever. You could have been happy like me. Why did you have to complicate things?
Happy? Peaceful? Lin Yi stares at the monster before him. The creature's idea of peace is a graveyard.
But it is fine. I have thought it over. You can still stay after all. Fresh young bodies are always the choice cuts.
The air crackles with sudden violence. Before the last syllable even lands, Dean Van Looy explodes into motion. He launches himself forward, a blur of shadow and raw power. He is faster than anything Lin Yi has ever faced. Lin Yi lunges backward, his instinct screaming, but the monster is already there. His face is inches away, and the human mask is finally slipping. Dien Van Looy's pupils begin to rotate in independent, sickening circles. Then, with a wet, squelching sound, they bulge outward. Two gelatinous stalks of flesh erupt from his eye sockets, writhing like parasitic worms inside a snail. They are mottled with hideous, bruised colors.
Lin Yi, don't be scared. It will be over in a heartbeat.
His hands, cold and iron-hard, clamp down on Lin Yi's arms. The grip is absolute. Lin Yi is pinned, his arms held with bone-crushing strength.
Once we are done, you'll feel a joy you never imagined. You'll stay here with me forever.
Get the hell off me!
Lin Yi strikes out with everything he has, driving his knee into the creature's groin with all his weight. But there is no reaction. Dien Van Looy doesn't even flinch. Instead, a dry, mocking laugh rattles in his throat.
You should listen to your Uncle Dean, Lin Yi, just like you used to. I love you too much to let you go. I'm doing this for your own good.
Lin Yi manages to reach into his bag, his fingers closing around the cold handle of a blade. He pulls it free and stabs desperately toward the monster's chest. Behind Dien Van Looy, Chu Kai sees his opening. He circles around the creature's blind spot, his own knife drawn and ready. He aims for the space between the shoulder blades. He remembers the hunched, distorted backs of the villagers. That has to be where the creature's core is hidden. But it's as if Dien Van Looy has eyes in the back of his head. He reacts with impossible speed, letting go of Lin Yi and twisting his torso mid-strike. In a single, fluid motion, he catches both of their wrists. He holds them both at bay, his strength far exceeding anything a human should possess. Chu Kai's senses had predicted the movement, but his body was too slow to respond. He's trapped in the monster's iron grip.
I only need one of you. The other I have to take back to the village.
Dien Van Looy's stalks of eyes swivel independently, one fixed on Lin Yi, the other on Chu Kai. It's a grotesque, panoramic gaze.
But don't you worry, you'll both end up back home eventually.
Chu Kai thrashes in the monster's grip, but his muscles are useless against that unnatural strength. He lets go of his knife. As the blade falls, his other hand snaps out, catching the hilt in midair and slashing at Dien Van Looy's forearm. The monster releases his grip to dodge, his reflexes as sharp as ever. Before Chu Kai can even finish his swing, a heavy boot slams into his stomach. The impact sends Chu Kai reeling. He hits the ground, gasping for air as the world spins. Everything is against him. The stench is a suffocating weight. The forest noise is a jagged blade against his brain. He had trained under in Chengdao, but this is a level of sensory hell he never imagined. He feels his mind slipping into a fog of pain and disorientation. If he keeps boosting everything, his psyche will shatter before the freak even finishes him. Through the ringing in his ears, he hears Lin Yi. His friend is still fighting, still struggling. He can't quit. But he's no match for the creature like this. He needs an edge, a different kind of edge. Chu Kai grits his teeth, tasting blood. He makes a choice. If hearing and smell are killing me, then I'll pour everything into sight. It's a gamble. The strain on his optic nerves will be immense, but it's better than certain death. He shuts down his other senses, withdrawing the energy and focusing it all into his eyes. A white-hot needle of pain stabs through his skull. He blinks rapidly, tears of blood welling in the corners of his eyes. When he finally forces them open, the forest is no longer just dark and gnarled. The world has sharpened into a hyper-vivid spectrum of detail, and there, weaving through the trees, he sees it. What is that shimmering flow? It looks like the wind. But it's solid, a tangible, glowing current of air that he can almost reach out and touch. A swarm of microscopic, shimmering particles erupted into Chu Kai's field of vision. These specks were so infinitesimally small that they would have been invisible without his sight pushed to its absolute limit. The tiny motes drifted through the space around him, lingering like the wandering spirits of a forgotten world. The realization struck him instantly. Wind had always been an invisible force, but he wasn't witnessing the air itself. Instead, he saw the microscopic dust suspended within it, scales of reality too fine for human perception. The dust swirled on the currents, its trails carving the hidden geometry of the wind directly into his retinas. Chukai severed his connection to sound and taste, dampening his other senses until only a base level of smell and touch remained. He focused every fragment of his will into his vision. A jagged, searing pain tore through his pupils, growing sharper every second. As his world fell silent, a heavy, oppressive stillness descended. In that frozen instant, his heightened sight caught a ripple. The dust particles surrounding Lin Yi and Den Van Loi had begun to swirl. The motion of the dust mirrored the path of the wind, and the path of the wind was the precursor to physical action. Within this silent void, Chukai's mind became as calm as a mirror-like pond. As he tracked the shimmering trails, his brain instinctively projected the coming movements of the combatants. In his mind's eye, he saw Lin Yi reach for a second blade, preparing a desperate strike against the monster. But the attack was clearly doomed. Den Van Loi's reaction time was biologically superior. A freak's evolution surpassed anything a human could achieve. The monster would easily pin Lin Yi's arm, crushing his momentum before it could even begin. Then, it would lunge, pressing its hideous, distorted face against its prey. The reality mirrored the premonition perfectly. As they moved, the air displaced in their wake followed the exact contours of their bodies. Every twitch dragged the atmosphere with it, creating the localized wind that Chukai now tracked with the cold precision of a predator. Den Van Loi's hands clamped around Lin Yi's wrists like iron bands, squeezing with lethal intent. Vicious pain surged through Lin Yi's arms. He could feel the pressure grinding his bones, threatening to snap them like dry twigs. His fingers lost their feeling, but even as his grip on the knife faltered, he refused to let the blade slip.
There is nothing like a young, robust body, so full of life, so overflowing with energy.
His voice was a wet rattle as his face pressed close. From his empty sockets, those bulbous eyes snaked out, twitching as they made contact with Lin Yi's skin. The sensation was sickening, the cold, slimy texture of the eye stalks tasting his flesh with every wriggle.
Even the skin is remarkably smooth.
The creature's bulging eyes were consumed with gluttony. He unhinged his jaw, and something deep within his gullet churned, eager to emerge. The proximity of those mucus-coated eyes made Lin Yi's stomach crawl with nausea, but he shoved the disgust aside, his mind racing for any opening. In a moment of desperate calculation, Lin Yi unhinged his own jaw. He lunged forward, snapping his teeth toward the monster's exposed eye stalks. If he could tear them away, he might have a chance. But the freak's reflexes were too sharp. Before his teeth could connect, the eyes retracted into the safety of the skull. Lin Yi's mouth slammed shut on nothing but cold, stagnant air. Chukai steadied his breathing. With a fluid, practiced motion, he unslung the crossbow from his pack.
You really believe that pathetic toy can do anything to me?
Den Van Loi's back was turned, yet his multi-directional vision allowed his left eye to snake backward, leering at Chukai's every move. The world was a vacuum of silence for Chukai. His ears were dead, his hearing intentionally severed. He couldn't hear the monster's mockery, but by tracking the creature's lip movements, he deciphered the arrogant intent.
If you're so sure of yourself, why don't you stick around and find out?
A white-hot agony flared within his pupils, pushing him to move with frantic, desperate speed. Chukai dropped to a single knee, his body forming a solid triangular anchor against the earth. He braced his elbow on his knee, carving out a stable platform for the weapon, His finger found the trigger, the bolt's tip locked onto Dien Van Looy's silhouette.
Heh! Ambitious! Now rot, you miserable stray!
Dien Van Looy's lips curled into a smirk. He began to shift his weight, confident in his ability to evade the projectile. But at the moment of his movement, the bolt's path distorted mid-air, deflecting as if nudged by an invisible current. The sudden correction was flawless. The bolt tore into Dien Van Looy's chest at an angle, burying its head deep within the muscle of his heart.
Fascinating! How did you manage that?
Dien Van Looy didn't collapse. He stood rigid, seemingly unaffected by the bolt buried in his heart. One of his eyes snaked out on a pulsing stalk, bending downward to peer at the projectile embedded in his chest.
By all laws of logic, I should have dodged that with ease.
Wind.
Chu Kai uttered the single word like a final judgment. He squeezed his eyes shut for a fleeting moment, allowing the burning, strained organs a second of desperate relief.
For the next one, I'm aiming for your temple.
He slotted a fresh bolt into the groove and hauled the string back into position. Chu Kai snapped his eyes open and loosed the trigger once more. Dien Van Looy watched the bolt's approach, twisting his torso and jerking his head aside to clear its path. But the location he dodged into was precisely where the bolt was destined to land. Dien Van Looy's brow furrowed. Sensing the trap, he tried to correct his movement, but it was too late. His temple slammed directly into the incoming bolt. It wasn't a matter of perfect aim. It was as if Dien Van Looy had actively guided himself into the strike.
What is this? What did you do to me?
The freak's voice hissed with realization. Something was fundamentally broken in his understanding of the encounter. By his calculations, his reflexes should have left the boys in the dust. Yet Chu Kai had tagged him twice. The second time, he had even broadcasted his intent. A dark curiosity began to coil in the monster's mind.
Was it the wind again? Tell me.
No. This time, you were just too stupid to stay out of the way.
Chu Kai's voice was soft, devoid of warmth, like the winter wind itself. 2 iron bolts were now lodged in the monster's flesh, one in the chest, one in the head. By all human standards, these were fatal injuries, yet Dien Van Looy remained upright, seemingly immune to the agony. As Chu Kai reset his weapon, the monster abruptly released his hold on Lin Yi. He hammered his foot into the soil, his silhouette blurring as he lunged with desperate speed to the left. But Chu Kai's reaction was faster. He was already tracking the empty space where the creature was destined to land. The third bolt struck with clinical precision, tearing straight through the monster's knee joint. 3 shots fired, 3 strikes delivered. The monster staggered, his confidence shattered. Lin Yi watched from the sidelines, immobilized by shock. Dien Van Looy was a different class of predator compared to the mantis wolves they had slaughtered before. While those beasts relied on thick armor and raw size, the village chief possessed a human-like form merged with supernatural reflexes. Yet, even with his evolutionary advantage, he had been unable to evade Chu Kai's bolts. Lin Yi's focus shifted to Chu Kai. The boy's eyes were now a deep, raw crimson, the capillaries having burst under the immense internal strain. The cost of such perfection was being paid in blood. If Chu Kai didn't stop soon, he would be blinded permanently.
What is the secret? How are you tracking me?
The playful Uncle Dien mask had finally disintegrated, replaced by a hollow predatory rattle.
My speed is beyond your biological limits. You shouldn't even be able to see me, let alone hit me.
A flicker of understanding ignited within the creature's protruding eyes. A hideous, distorted grin stretched across his features.
I understand now. You aren't just a stray, you're a god-chosen. Remarkable. To think I would encounter one of your kind so early in the cycle. The flesh of a god chosen is a delicacy beyond compare, refined, potent, and pure.
A jarring, multi-layered laugh erupted from Dean Van Looy's throat, two distinct voices emerging from a single body.
When I consume your shell, that divine gifted power will belong to me.
The monster lunged, a sudden explosion of predatory intent aimed directly at Chu Kai. His fingers, hooked like talons, reached for the boy's exposed throat. But as the monster closed the distance, Chu Kai rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. He dove to the left, evading the grasping hand with an unnatural, chilling precision. A heartbeat later, Dean Van Looy was exactly where the bolt was heading. The projectile hissed through the darkness, burying itself deep in the monster's neck. Despite the catastrophic injury, the freak refused to fall. Lin Yi tightened his grip on his blade. He began to sprint forward, desperate to close the distance and shield his partner. But as he ran, a strange shimmer caught his attention, a visual anomaly that shouldn't exist. A thin, ethereal thread of light trailed from Dien Van Looy's back, a glowing umbilical of energy. The translucent strands stretched through the air, connecting the monster's body directly to Chu Kai's open mouth.
Chu Kai, look out!
Lin Yi bellows a warning as he heart pounds across the debris-strewn floor, but the boy remains oblivious, his senses locked onto a different frequency. Chu Kai's gaze is a cold laser, fixed on the monstrosity that was once a friend. Every neuron in his brain is firing, mapping out a lethal trajectory in the dim light. Steel bolts are already peppered across the monster, one in the chest, another in the skull, one more in the throat. But this freak is resilient, far tougher than the mantis wolves they faced in the city. There is only one path to victory, a precise killing strike right between the shoulder blades where the core resides. He managed to snag only 3 bolts during the initial scramble. One is already buried deep in the thing's neck. That leaves him with 2 final shots. He slides the bolt into the rail, his hands preternaturally steady despite the carnage unfolding before him.
I'm aiming for your heart this time.
Even as the first projectile flies, Chu Kai is already chambering his final hope, working the mechanism with blurred speed. The hammer strike tactic is simple. The first bolt aims for the one already protruding from the creature's chest, intended to drive the steel tip all the way through the body. He reads the room, sensing the subtle shift in the air currents before the monster even moves. Dien Van Looy is going to move. A desperate tilt of the body to avoid the chest shot, exactly as predicted. By dodging, the freak opens the very window Chu Kai was waiting for. The second bolt strikes from the side, angling toward the vulnerable spine. The monster had been too careful, always keeping its front toward its prey. This was the only way to force it to expose its back. It was checkmate. Whether it moved or stood still, one of the bolts was guaranteed to bite. A stray gust of wind from a hole in the shack wall nudges the final bolt just a hair's breadth, driving it straight into the nexus between the shoulder blades. The skin on the creature's back ripples and heaves, a sickening rhythmic spasm that tears at its stolen frame. Dien Van Looy's hands fly back, his fingers digging into his own flesh as if trying to trap the nightmare pulsating within his spine. The horrific eye stalks sink back into his skull, leaving behind empty, dark pits that stare into the void as his vitality begins to evaporate.
Please, stop! Don't let it!
His body shudders as if his very muscles are being consumed from the inside, leaving only a gaunt, skeletal frame wrapped in a stolen skin. Finally, his knees give way, hitting the dirt floor with a hollow, terminal thud. He rolls in the dust, his hands still desperately clamped over the wound on his back. his movements reduced to pathetic, feverish tremors.
Did we get him?
Chu Kai lets his eyes fall shut, his mental fortress finally crumbling under the weight of his own godlike focus. Lin Yi lunges forward, catching the boy before he can collapse into the dirt alongside the monster. Lin Yi's victory is short-lived. He stares at the air around Chu Kai's face, where the spectral threads of a dark destiny still linger, refusing to fade. He reaches out, his fingers brushing against the invisible strands. He snaps them with a sudden, sharp motion.
Lin Yi? What's happening?
Chu Kai rubs his eyes, the residual heat of his supernatural vision searing the back of his lids like hot coals.
Those threads, I tried to break them. I wanted to see what happened next.
A violent tremor racks Lin Yi's body as the memory of the sensation returns, a biological intrusion that defied logic.
But something slithered into my mouth. It was cold, and it smelled like rotting meat.
He can't scrub the feeling from his mind, the viscous, oily weight of it sliding down his throat like a living thing invading his lungs.
The monster? Is it dead?
Lin Yi looks back at the shivering heap that was once a man, a grim realization settling deep in his chest.
Not dead yet, but he's barely hanging on. He looks half dead already.
Dean Van Looy is a shivering heap on the dirt floor. His features are sunken, his vitality drained. The predatory hunter from moments ago has vanished into this pitiful shell. He looks exactly like the husk they found in the corner, rotting amidst a pile of human remains, barely clinging to a life that isn't truly his anymore.
I need to be sure. I'm finishing this now. Stay where you are.
Lin Yi gestures for Chu Kai to keep his distance. The boy is already balanced on the razor's edge of collapse, and the risk of another psychic backfire is too high.
I'm not losing you here.
Chu Kai nods, his form swaying like a reed in a storm. The mental toll of his ability has left him hollowed out, his grip on reality slipping.
Give me a moment. I'll handle him.
Lin Yi tightens his grip on the survival knife, the handle slick with cold sweat. He strides toward the shriveled thing twitching on the ground. A sharp pang of grief cuts through his icy resolve. He remembers a different Din Van Looy, a kind man who once shared his games and his time, long before the world went to hell. The bitterness wells up in his throat. These monsters had taken everything, even the memories of the people he once called friends.
Forgive me, Uncle Dean. Goodbye.
He grits his teeth and rolls the shell of the man over onto his stomach with a forceful shove. The body feels impossibly light, a weightless container of skin and bone that offers no resistance to his touch. He raises the blade high, his eyes fixed on the nexus between the shoulder blades, the very spot Chu Kai had compromised. But as the metal sinks in, Lin Yi's stomach drops. There is no resistance, no impact of steel against bone or flesh. Just a terrible, empty gap. The shirt ripples and collapses into the wound, revealing a terrifying hollowness beneath the cloth that shouldn't exist.
What the?
He rips the fabric away, his pulse hammering against his ribs as the true horror comes into view. A horrific gaping void stares back at him from between the shoulder blades. The interior of the body is a hollow shell.
This isn't possible. It's gone.
The realization hits him like a bucket of ice water, draining the warmth from his blood. The core, the monster, it isn't here. Dean Van Looy's head slumps to the side, a hollow, lifeless weight. Lin Yi roughly pulls back his eyelid, expecting to find the horrific eye stalks. But there is nothing but dark, empty orbits where eyes should be. The parasite has vacated its human shell.
Oh God, Chu Kai.
Lin Yi spins on his heel, his heart hammering against his ribs as he looks back at the exhausted boy. On the dusty floor, barely inches from Chu Kai's feet, a mass of viscous gray-brown sludge is slithering through the shadows. It is perfectly camouflaged, its color identical to the damp earth. In the dim flicker of the lamp, it is almost entirely invisible until it moves. The trap is sprung. The freak was never near death. It was merely biding its time, waiting for them both to drop their guard. It knew Chukai was too fast, too perceptive while his ability was active. It had to wait for the exhaustion to set in before it could strike. It had detached itself from its previous host, using the distraction of Lin Yi's mercy kill to crawl toward its true prize. The realization hits Lin Yi with sickening clarity. Dian Van Looy's screams hadn't been from the pain of the bolts. He had been screaming in a final, desperate effort to keep the monster inside him.
Chukai, get away, now!
Lin Yi lunges toward the boy, his hands clawing at the air, but he is too far away. The distance feels like miles. The mass of gray-brown slime coils like a spring and then leaps, a blurring shadow of biological horror aimed straight for Chukai's face.